All right. Well, welcome. Jeez, I'm flabbergasted that I broke the system. This is our little brew house. I don't have any pictures. I'm sorry. Who was here the last Judy Ringer talk? She's amazing, absolutely amazing, and I'm like floored that you're in our presence here. So a little history about me. I got my master's in ceramics, and I've always been an artist. My mother knew that there was something wrong with me when I would smell my food and like turn my nose up to the turnips or whatever. But anything I smelled that I liked, I thoroughly enjoyed and would eat it. So my palate was trained very early, and my father was inspirational. He loved wine, but he wasn't a crazy enophile or anything. He was just a Joe Blow who loved wine, and he introduced us to wine at a very early age, and I thought that was kind of another assemblage of my palate. But pioneers really are the people who set out and started this industry, and there are three people in particular that are my mentors. They are Fritz Maytag from Anchor Brewing, Ken Grossman from Sierra Nevada, and somebody that you probably never heard of. His name is Jack McAuliffe, and he was from New Albion. And New Albion was a brewery in, I think it was Sacramento. This was in the 70s. Nobody was making craft beer in the 70s. You know, there were three big companies that spent tons of money on advertising. Very little bit on the product, but a lot on advertising. And all three of those big beers are fairly nondescript. But Jack McAuliffe, Ken Grossman, and Fritz, thank you. Brain's not working. Coffee. So it turns out that ingredients were hard to get for them. Packaging materials were hard to get for them. Everything was difficult, but they persevered. They were the guys that said, hey, the hell with the norm. Let's do something different. Let's get creative. Let's make beer that actually tastes like something. And this was instrumental in changing what was a yellow fizzy beer culture to people actually entertaining the thought of having a pale ale, something with hops. So cool. So I was in graduate school and was firing kilns. Kilns take upwards of 24 hours and sometimes 2 days to fire, depending on the style of kiln. And we used to drink a lot of beer. They say it takes a lot of good beer to make wine. It takes a lot of beer to make a wood-fired kiln work. But anyway, we drank a lot of beer, and so one day my wife gave me a homebrew kit. So, and Genevieve, my wife is my partner. She's my business partner. She runs the brewery. I just make the beer. I get all the credit. She runs the brewery. She's incredible. Accolades. She's not here. She had a prior commitment, unfortunately. But hot coffee. Black coffee. It's the way to do it. Anyway, so she gave me a homebrew kit, and all of a sudden I started making beer and was like, whoa, this is a process. This is like ceramics. It's understanding your ingredients, it's recipe formulation, it's time and temperature, it's chemistry, and with beer it's microbiology, and there's a little bit of magic involved as well. And so for me, a transition from getting a master's in ceramics, I couldn't get a job for my life. Every college I went to, and this was my dream job, teaching ceramics to college students. How cool would that be? Do a little work here, work for 9 months there, do a little more work here, get your work out there. They wanted an exhibition record. You go to graduate school, you're a poor, meager little guy, and they expect you to have a exhibition record. So for me, I pounded the pavement and I could not land a job. How many of you been there? Can't get that job. Where's that job? I was at a beer tasting, and I was talking to Steve Mason, who owned Catamount Brewing Company, which is now defunct. It was the first brewery I ever worked at. It was in White River Junction, and they were gangbusters. They were one of the pioneers too. Brewery in Vermont. brewery in Vermont? Who has a brewery in Vermont? They just make maple syrup up there. And they make really good maple syrup up there. But anyway, I was at this beer tasting and I said, hey, do you take on interns or apprentices? It was like, yeah, actually, we are just finishing up an intern. Can you start in September? I was like, yeah, I can start right now. And so I worked 4 days a week for them, starting on a Monday. And I had a friend who had a house that I surf couched on, and was able to sleep on his couch. And I got paid weekly, very weekly. And but I got my foot in the door. And the most important thing was saying yes. I did everything, and I mostly cleaned kegs. That was my job, cleaning kegs. 80 kegs a week, and then we would fill them. And I got to fill them. Brewing? Nah, not so much. Toothbrush, tiles, scrub. Yeah, no, it's a humbling experience, but I got my foot in the door, and that was really amazing. So after I was at the Catamount, I interviewed for a job at Harpoon. And it turns out their brewer had just chopped part of his finger off and doing kegging. And I was like, oh, I can keg. But anyway, I actually played this guy's hands. And I was questioning him about what he was doing. And he was really a marathon runner. He knew nothing about making beer. He was following a chart and processing. I had actually read homebrewing books, and I made beer. So I kind of knew what I was doing, but I also called the head brewer and was like, hey, the alpha acids on these hops are different. How do I change that formulation? And so he gave me the formulation, and when we got a new box of hops in, we would change them. And we sort of made the beer a little more consistent. And then this guy who was the lead brewer said, you know what, Todd, you take over. So I took over. I designed Harpoon IPA. Like, how crazy is that? I bet just about everybody in here was weaned on Harpoon APA, right? But so that was my foray into making good beer. At the time, there wasn't a whole lot of great beer. Not like there is now. This is an amazing time period to be in the beer industry, mainly because there's such a variety of beer. A hell of a lot of IPAs, hell of a lot of the turbid IPAs. And I won't even go there because my whole life I've been spending trying to make clear beer without filtering. And the process involves the mashing technique. So mashing is where you incorporate the milled grain into hot water, you stabilize at a certain temperature, and then you can either raise that temperature or you can just stay at that temperature. And what we found is that mashing and raising the temperature actually utilizes different enzymes which break down different starches, which then create fermentables and unfermentables. So we're actually creating a dynamic product just by utilizing hot water and steam. With that we just are able to control what we do. So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. After I was at Harpoon, I moved on to a small company called the Commonwealth Brewing Company. It was right across from the garden. And it was the first place I ever had a really complex beer like an old ale that has high ethanol content, big malt character, and just a perfect amount of hops underneath that creates this incredible balance. And I just was enamored by the old ale. And I was like, wow, and I had tasted the beer there previously while like going to a basketball game or something, and just remembered that this beer was so cool. And then I got a job there and started making that beer. And then I started dissecting it. And what is it that makes that beer? Well, the malt. There was English malt in that beer. I'd been using domestic malt the whole time I'd been in the brewing industry, which was all 3 years. And so I got into the industry in 1990. So 27 years? It's like, whoa, how did that happen? Well, I'm turning 60 next year, so my God, I guess it did happen. But anyway, you know, I had another career. I had that ceramics career, and now this is my career, and it's 27 years in. But what was really amazing to me was taking barley malt, hops, water, and yeast, and actually turning it into something. And that's where the creative process is. And understanding the ingredients and your recipe formulation is all that creative process. The magic really is the chemistry, the yeast. The yeast does all the work for us. You know, it's not like we pour 151 into the top of a tank and boom, you've got alcohol, you've got beer. The yeast does all the work. And so for us, it's a matter of prep, a matter of cleaning, and getting everything in order, and then processing. With the next step, I went to the Back Bay Brewing Company, where I actually brewed my first Imperial Stout. We called it Boston Strangler Stout. we got a cease and desist order from the families. That was the 60s that the Strangler was around. And this was 95 when we first did the Imperial Stout. And so we got a cease and desist order, but people kind of dug the beer. And no, it was not thought out well. Anyway, having been at the Back Bay for 5 years, it was time for those guys to move on. They decided the beer thing was over. This is 1999, they decided the beer thing was over, and they closed the doors in 2000. So I was out of job. I went, I spent my kids' education money on a small brewery in Quincy, Massachusetts. Wrong place, wrong time. And I lost my kids' education fund. Fortunately, my mother had started a 529 when my kids were born, so I had a little backup, a little help. And, you know, things progressed. We were in business for 9 months. We won a gold medal at the Great American Beer Festival for Abigail Adams Amber, which was like an Irish red ale. Again, a recipe that I've carried with me my whole life, well, since then. At the auction, the $65,000 equipment that I had bought and used at Quincy went on auction for $18,000. It broke my heart. And I couldn't bid on it because I didn't have an $18,000 to spend on it. So, and they didn't have Kickstarter funds or any of that fundraising sites. So I kind of bit my lip and let the people bid auction for it. And I was talking to a guy there, and he was like, look, I'm looking for somebody to install my brewery in Haverhill, Mass. So now I've gone from the mecca of beer in Boston to Quincy, and now I'm going to Haverhill. Sometimes you just got to follow who's going to employ you. So again, I went to Haverhill. I installed this brewery with the intention that I was just going to get it running and then move on. Well, this brewery was so awesome. I could actually do stepped infusion mashing legitimately. So I was making these kick-ass beers, but nobody was drinking them. So I was sitting on beer for months, and it was such a bummer because, you know, I was told that Haverhill's a really up-and-coming town. They've got this really cool restaurant called Keon's, and everyone goes there, except they didn't come across the street to drink beer at the tap. And so, unfortunately, I was kind of floundering for 8 months at the tap, and I got a phone call from Peter Eggleston, or actually, no, David Yarrington, who was the head brewer at Smutty Nose, and he said, hey, do you know anyone who is, in fact, looking for a job? I was like, no, not right now. But let me put on my thinking cap, and I hung up. Bing! Like, I'm looking for a job. so I called David back, and I was like, yeah, hey, I want to throw my hat in the ring. Let's do it. And he was like, really? I'm like, yeah. So I went up, I interviewed, and we were living in Boston. My daughter was at Boston Latin. Now, Boston Latin is the oldest high school in America. It's the feeder school for Harvard. You have to be a really smart cookie to get in there. How did my daughter, she got my wife's brains. So I wasn't going to destroy her life and move her to Marshwood. Marshwood's a great school. My son actually went to Marshwood. But we were not going to upset her life. So I commuted between Portsmouth and Boston. And the commute north was an hour and 15 minutes all the time. It was a piece of cake. Heading south was a crapshoot. There were times when, if it was snowing, 4 hours to get from Portsmouth back to Boston. And we were living in West Roxbury, so, you know, kind of the outskirts of Boston, Southwest Corridor. But anyway, so I commuted. And my interview with Peter and David was the coolest interview I've ever had, because what do brewers do? They drink beer. So there I was in the fishbowl with David and Peter going back and forth about the beers that were on at Portsmouth Brewery. What would I do to make the beer better? I was like, oh, change them all. and that went over okay, but Peter kind of looked at me. He's like, "You're not going to change the brown dog recipe." I was like, "Oh no, God no! That was your medal winner. I promise I won't change that." But I changed every single beer that was on at Portsmouth Brewery. I also brought on this little stout that I'd been carrying along with me along the way, that I'd been embellishing and getting better, and I really got better over time. And all of a sudden, in 2007, so I got my job in 2003 at Portsmouth Brewery, and I had a really great time. And after 2 years there, we then moved up, and we moved to South Berwick, which is where we are now. And I was able to make that Imperial Stout. And the Beer Advocate awarded us like the highest praise for the beer. It was called the best beer in America in 2007, December of 2007. Well, at Portsmouth Brewery, our Imperial Stout was on for like 3 or 4 months. After that issue, it was gone in like a week. And then all of a sudden it turned into this cult. And people were like lining up for the release day the next day. And we were one of the first breweries where there was actually lines to get a beer that was limited supply. So we did 900 bottles the first year, hand bottled in a 22-ounce bottle. And it was amazing. We closed the doors at 11 o'clock at night, and there were people in line. As soon as the door closed, they were there. And they were there all night long. And this was the first week in March. Some seriously die-hard beer drinkers. This was 2007, you know. The wave is just really starting to form, and it is so incredible to see the proliferation of small community-based breweries. What is the small community-based brewery? It's what we are. We are Tributary Brewing Company. The name, Tributary. You know what tributaries are? They're the water source that lead to the ocean. We work in Kittery. It's all about the tributaries. And we really do care about the water. It's really, really important. It's a huge part of the beer. We've got beautiful water from York coming through the Kittery Water District. It does go through a fluorination, or chlorine. So there is chlorine in the water. We do use a activated charcoal carbon filter to remove the chlorine, and we also heat the water. So our water is really beautiful. It makes great, great ales. Lagers, we have to actually precipitate the minerals out, and so that we can do just by boiling the water. It's a very simple process. But we really wanted people to come to Tributary, so we decided we weren't going to package. We kegged beer, but we weren't going to put beer in cans. We weren't going to put beer in bottles. We do a limited release of Mott Lesser, and we do put that in bottles. But we really wanted people to come to the brewery, to come sit. And we'd been to England a couple of times, and we decided the best thing in the world for us would to have communal tables and no TVs. There's so many distractions. I can't tell you how many people go to bars and they're staring at the TV, or they're we get a lot of that. Excuse me. We get a lot of that, but it's people rating beer. It's like, oh God, how dorky is that? You know, I've tasted 3,722 beers, and I remember every single one of them. I'm like, God, I can't remember the beer I drank last night. Well, it's because I got a little hammered, but anyway, we really decided the best way for people to come to Trib was to have a really nice environment, place where people can congregate, families, dogs. We let dogs in. We had the agriculture inspector by, and she's like, our dog was sitting in one of the chairs. We have 2 like plush chairs, and Katie was sitting in the chair, and she kind of looks over and goes, "You let dogs in?" I'm like, "Oh no, just that dog. She runs the place." And she goes, "Where's the water bowl?" I'm like, "Next to the sink." She's like, "Mm-mm." So we have to have the water bowl officially in our office. Who's going to let a dog drink water in your office? You know, they splash water everywhere. In any event, Tributary is a community-based brewery. We have so many incredibly gifted artists here and across the river in Kittery, and they come, they get their growlers, they get them refilled, they get them refilled. This is an endless, beautiful cycle of recycling because the glass is always good. Cans, crunch. Sometimes they're thrown in the road, sometimes they're not disposed of. I don't like drinking out of a can. So the whole purpose of putting it in a can and not drinking out of the can, or drinking out of the can, I don't know. I don't get it. But Oh God, I'm going to get shot for that. We will probably can one day, who knows, but I really don't want to. I love glass. Glass is a good thing. There's silica everywhere. It's really easy to mine, and glass is totally recyclable. Anyway, Kittery-based, community-based Tributary Brewing Company is our place. We have, again, an amazing community. I have 2 brewers that work with me. Both of them have moved up the line. My original assistant moved on and is now consulting. He figured that it's better to consult and make a lot of money than to actually work. I have the opposite effect. I like to work. I would so much rather be working than sitting doing that. And so I don't do a lot of that. And I'm not on social media. I don't do Twitter. I don't do any of that crap. I make beer. And that, to me, is the most important thing that I can do. I've been making beer for 27 years. I make really good beer. People come. Most people say, I hate blueberry beer. Well, it's because you haven't drunk our blueberry beer. I hate pumpkin beer. That's because you haven't drunk our pumpkin beer. I'm a traditional brewer. I've been brewing traditional styles using really beautiful ingredients. We get our pumpkins from Blueberry Bay Farm. They're over in Stratham. Organic pumpkins. They're Dickinson's. They are 20-pound sugar pumpkins. They're beautiful. They have this lovely flesh. We shred them. I still have great ties with Portsmouth Brewery. I left on good terms. I did take my recipe from Kate the Great. It's now Mott the Lesser. It's kind of a shove to Peter because he wouldn't give me the name. It's like, what the hell? Come on, just let me take the name. No. Like, okay, we'll call it Mott the Lesser. So Mott the Lesser is kind of like a, boom, Peter, thanks for nothing. I respect Peter enormously. Unfortunately for Peter and a lot of these larger breweries, the guys that are doing 20 to 50,000 barrels, us little guys, there are 5,600 breweries in America right now. It's incredible. It's so incredible. And of those 5,600 breweries, 75% of them are making 1% of the beer market. We have a long way to go. We got a lot of people to change their palates. But you're never going to change the person that buys that 30-pack for $12.95. It's like, God damn, one of my beers is $16. Like, who's going to buy a $16 when they could buy a suitcase? So we are Tributary, and that's about all I got.